radioislamlive.com. Today, part 2 on preparing our children for adulthood and beyond. And please be ready for some truth bombs. We're talking about things that are real, practical, and we're looking at solutions, really solution-focused for supporting and guiding and facilitating for our youth to prepare for adulthood and beyond. And I remember a couple of years back when the ulama started talking about this in faith-based centers or marriage counselors and advisors were talking about how, we're preparing our daughters and, I suppose our sons, but this was again in female circles that I heard. So in that context, that we're preparing our daughters in terms of their wedding and trousseau, and we're preparing, their AMC pots and their Tupperwares and the clothes that they have and the bags and the jewelry. And again, there's nothing wrong in that, but just saying that we prepare them only for that. So they are fixated and they are focused only on that day, the nikah day, the wedding day, the walima day, the photography, the clothes, the lighting, the guests, the food, and all of that. And that's beautiful, that's special memories and all of that. We're not discounting that. However, we're preparing our daughters, they were saying at that time, for that day, for that wedding day, and not for the marriage. Yeah. And at that stage already, and we're talking about more than 10 or 15 years ago, countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, parts of North America, were already having a syllabus and classes and modules churning out at the masajid, at the Islamic centers, on everything from compatibility to financial literacy to emotional intelligence, that these prospective bride and groom had to sit in for these classes, write exams, do theory, do practical, do role modeling, sit down with marriage counselors, go through an intensive few-month program, and then to be able to say, okay, right, now they're ready to get married. As in, okay, now go ahead and start setting a date or get everything ready. And yet, in many other communities, the focus is really on the wedding day itself and nothing beyond that. And that's just one of the aspects. But today, when you speak to youngsters, when you speak, and this is not generalizing, but a significant portion of youth, I'm talking about from the age of 12 upwards, often there's not much to be spoken about. There's nothing that we can really talk about. And I'm not talking about generational gap or difference. That's a different ballgame, but really that there isn't a conversation to be had. There's no etiquette, there's no way of starting or continuing or ending a conversation, and there's no engagement in that conversation. There's no rapport in those discussions either. So today we're talking now in part 2, our preparation for our children, helping them prepare for their adulthood and beyond. We're going to find out more about that in today's program. And today we're going to be talking more about the balance, that work-play balance. We're talking about financial literacy and economic challenges and how that comes into play when we're helping our youth prepare for adulthood and beyond. Our guest today is a life coach and author, Brother Zaid Ismail, and he'll be talking to us, sharing with us more today on preparing our children for adulthood and beyond. Coach Zaid, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Radio Islam again.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah again for allowing me to join you on your platform.
Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure. Jazakumullah khair. And I think last week's program, part 1 in this installment, was certainly food for thought, not only for our listeners, but definitely for myself. So I want to thank you again for sharing so generously with us. Jazakumullah khair.
Ameen. Barakallah.
Alhamdulillah. As parents, we tend in some cultural setups, I think in many, if not all, at some point to over-baby our children. Some sons over daughters, daughters over sons, or both. So we end up doing every small thing to make life easier for them, whether it's domestic household chores, whether it's homework and assignments, whether it's making decisions, everything from play dates to which friend to keep and let go of, which pair of socks to wear, or tying their shoes, washing their plate. How are we as parents setting our children back when it comes to learning these key skills like decision making? And then if we are guilty, I want to use that word, guilty, of doing that, how do we stop doing this? Us, the parents.
I think the more we protect our children from getting things wrong, the more we make failure feel like something bad. And more than this, the thing is that as long as our children are achieving things within a protected environment, we also deny them the true sweetness of accomplishment. And the reason why that's important is because if you don't feel as if you accomplished something under your own steam, you don't develop a credibility within your abilities to be able to accomplish things. And then you always go around looking for safe spaces in which to operate. And the moment things are not safe, it brings out a side of you that you're usually not proud of.
Yeah. I think in many of our Asian cultures, it's about really keeping the sons safe in many instances, where everything's done for the son, and that's shown as a sign of love. Whether it's allowing him to stay out later at night than the sister. I'm not saying either is correct, but it's what's happening in society. Or whether it's about picking up after him, or whether it's about your teenage son not knowing how to fry an egg, but your 10-year-old daughter needs to be able to put together a whole pot of biryani. The inequality, the stereotyping.
Yes.
How's that playing out?
I think a lot of that is a combination of how we see our children's conduct as a reflection of our almost social standing, right? And we derive that social standing from how well our children are perceived. So for sons to be successful, because they primarily, I would say, groomed as being the breadwinners in their families, how well they can do that is a positive reflection on us. How well they show up as fathers, well, we can make a lot of excuses for why we shouldn't expect more from them, because life is tough and they're doing so much at work and they're working so hard for their families and everything else. And that's another problem we need to look at another time, inshallah. But to answer your question, the reason why we have this double standard in what we expect from boys versus girls is because we're not raising them with values, we're raising them with fear. And when it comes to the conduct of girls, I think the biggest fear we have is that they mustn't come home pregnant. They mustn't destroy the family honor. We always make girls responsible for the honor of the family, but boys, we make excuses for their conduct because it's like, boys will be boys. And I think that's one of the most horrible mindsets you can adopt around raising children, because we spoke previously about akhlaq and how akhlaq is developed. And if you're going to make excuses for bad behavior, or you're going to make excuses for poor character when they're children, they're going to expect people to make excuses for them when they're adults, because they don't know any different. So we can't raise them on one value system and then expect them to conduct themselves under the more ideal value system once they're married or once they're supposed to show up for their families. We are not equipping them in a fair way to be able to deal with life. And I think, just to emphasize the point I made just now about accomplishment, we absolutely underestimate the importance of that. So when we pick up after them, when we don't hold them accountable for the way they conduct themselves around the house, or with their chores, or with the things that they have, where they don't take care of what they've got, or they show a disregard for other people's spaces in the house and things like that. Simple things like clearing up the table after you're done, or assisting with the dishes, or keeping the place clean and tidy, things like that. The moment we allow them to get away with that, and we think that, well, they're just children, they mustn't be so responsible, they're going to have to do this for the rest of their life and all of that, you're effectively teaching them entitlement. And then when they learn entitlement and they conduct themselves in an entitled way, then you wonder, where did you go wrong as a parent?
Yeah. Listeners, we are speaking to Brother Zaid Ismail, a life coach and author, and we're talking today about preparing our children for adulthood and beyond, part 2. Part 1 is up on Radio Islam's podcast on the website. And an interesting article to read in this regard is one that Brother Zaid blogged earlier this year on his website, zaidismail.com, and it's entitled Raising Adults. Beautiful read, something that gives you plenty of food for thought, and some aspects that we're touching on in today's program. Coach, a lot of our kids are in a rat race of some sort. So they've got school and madrasa, they have extracurricular activities, but many parents are still not convinced that there needs to be this balance. There's this idea, this notion that, they're kids, they can take on everything, they have all the energy and the strength. And look, we can afford to give them what our parents couldn't give. So they will cope. They will just cope. And sometimes we look at that resilience, we label it resilience. And as a result, we compromise on teaching them a very valuable life skill of balance.
Yes.
How important do you see balance when it comes to helping them build the life skills for their adulthood?
I think balance is absolutely critical, because that's when we lose ourselves to the urgency of life if we don't have that balance. And I think one of the reasons why we assume that they must just be able to cope is because we focused on how much effort and how hard we're working to give them this life that we want for them, that they must just show appreciation for our efforts. So they don't have a right to complain or fall back or not be interested. Because we're doing so much for them, it would be ungrateful of them or disrespectful of them not to do the most they can with it. And that's part of where the kind of divide begins. Because we're not seeing the human that we're connecting with and wanting to create a good life for. We're seeing the child who needs to be grateful. Because we're parents that are putting in our best to give them a life worth living. And there's no connection in that. There's no grounding point in that. There's no feeling as if you're seen or heard or appreciated in that. It's a transaction, and it's not a very good transaction at all. So when it comes to trying to get our children to have balance, we need to approach them with balance. They do as we do, not as we say. So we can conduct ourselves in a way that loses ourselves, where we let ourselves go both physically, emotionally, mentally. We lose the zest for life and become duty-bound and focused on serving others. And then we expect our children to have a healthier balance in life than that. It doesn't work. You mentioned earlier about how it is that we raise them to be a certain way. We focus on the wedding day. And sometimes, if they're fortunate, they get to go on some or other premarital kind of training or classes to prepare them for what marriage is about. But that kind of instruction only keeps you going as long as things are working out. When things are not working out, when things are not going according to the plan that it's supposed to, when your partner doesn't show up the way you need them to because they've got their own challenges that you don't know about, then the behavior that you are going to display under duress is going to be the behavior that you saw in your parents when they were under duress. And that's how it is that I see people struggling the most to be a parent, because they're trying their best not to be like their parents. And the only thing they've got to work with is their parents. That's their frame of reference for how parenting is done. So you can choose what you don't want from your parents, but it doesn't mean you're going to know what you need to do or be as a parent. And that's the difficulty we've got. Everyone knows what they don't like and what they want, but they don't know how, because they don't have any healthy role models or frames of reference to understand how.
Yeah, so it's expanding that reference, and it goes back to us as the parents to work on ourselves. Often as our children get older, we find that parents will turn the blame towards their children.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come back to this about the balance. If we were to look at a scenario, let's say we had a 16-year-old who is going to school, he does his, and he is doing taekwondo, and he's now some time just to be with his friend.
Mm-hmm.
Coach, what would that balance look like or feel like for him?
I think the most important thing is they need to understand what's the purpose behind what they're doing. Not that they need to do this because it's going to hold them in good stead in some way or another. Or not because, you're trying to create your akhirah out of this. Everything has to be purposeful in that moment. If it's not purposeful in that moment, it feels like it's a burden because I have to do this or else. And that's not a sustainable way to instill balance or or be enthusiastic about life, because everything becomes about fear. And we don't realize it becomes about fear because then we start finding ways to make the fear more bearable, more tolerable. And that's when we start coming up with distractions. And some of the distractions are healthy ones, or at least seemingly healthy. Like, for example, needing to take a break, go on a holiday, have family vacation time. And those seem like, oh, okay, we needed this break. But the question then is, what is it that you're doing at home that is so out of balance and so overbearing and burdensome that you actually need that break? Not that you take that break because you want an experience with your family. So if we're lacking that balance at home, if we're lacking the balance in the way we're approaching things, when we encourage our children towards doing extracurricular activities, taekwondo, archery, whatever it is, pottery classes, swimming, and the list goes on, we're filling their day with activity, but we're not filling their day with purpose. And I think that's a critical issue. The purposefulness behind what they're doing and what they take from that and how they reapply that in different ways and how it shapes their maturity and their wisdom. We lose sight of all of that because we're looking at achieving specific outcomes relative to that activity. What is the purpose beyond it?
That's right.
I mean, like
it's powerful, going back to the whole purpose, right?
Yeah, it's like the martial arts thing is supposed to instill a lot of discipline, but at the same time, it should also instill a lot of calm and composure and confidence. Now, if we're going to limit that to the martial arts itself, then we're not going to see that reflected in any other area of their life. And that's how we start compartmentalizing life for them. And when you compartmentalize life, the lessons and the values that you achieve in one domain of your life, you don't know how to connect it with other domains that you might be struggling with.
That's right. It reminds me of parents who have spoken to him, said, literally their confessions were, my kids are doing this activity and that. They're not happy at all, but it's what I couldn't do when I was a child. So now that I can give it to them, and I said, are you giving it to them or are you giving yourself the experience? Because they're miserable at it. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And that's how a good intention with a bad method just achieves a bad outcome. And then we wonder, but how did we get here? Because we did all the right things, or what we thought was the right thing. We had good intention behind it, and they just don't appreciate us. So children these days, they don't appreciate anything. That's why they are the way they are. It's not just that. It's that we are not giving them an opportunity to connect with the value of what it is that we want them to experience.
Right. What about this whole notion of, well, we have to keep them busy. They shouldn't be idle or bored.
I think that is one of the worst things you can do to children, is keeping them busy all the time. Because if you're busy all the time, and as adults, we struggle with this as well. If you're busy all the time, when do you get a chance to reflect, to just allow your subconscious to process everything that you've experienced and acquired and learned? When do you get the chance to observe what's important, whether you're heading in the right direction, where do you need to course correct in your life? Everything is so then responsible and driven and fast-paced that you're chasing all the time. You're chasing because I need to finish this because that is waiting for me, and I need to do that because I like this hobby of mine, or I like that interest of mine. And everything then just becomes this chase after chase after chase. And your children see this. And eventually, if they grow up looking at that and they're thinking, well, you never had time for me. So then they get into their adult years and they think, well, I'm not going to be like that. So I'm not going to force my children to do anything they don't want to do. And this is how we end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because then they look at what was an unpleasant experience for them, or what it is that they felt was an imposition, not because it was good for them, but because their parents wanted them to do it, regardless of what they felt about it. And then they resist that in their role as parents, and suddenly you see them raising your grandchildren in a way that you disapprove of, and you don't know how come.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're an interesting bunch, eh?
Yeah, we are indeed. As a coach, I know you work with people on different levels and on different topics, wherever they are at in their journey of life. And listeners, you could read up more on that on Brother Zaid's coaching approach. It's on the website, zaidismail.com. So when you're working with different clients, I'm sure financial issues, financial literacy comes up as a topic. I'm interested to know from you, is there an age at which you think children should be taught or modeled at least towards financial literacy? How do you begin making them money wise?
I think from
when do you start?
I think it starts from the first time you give them an allowance or spending money. If we waiting,
or that ED,
or that ED even, right? Yeah. I mean, you see some people when they give their children ED, then they allow the children to like choose haphazardly what it is that they want, and if they want to buy them sweets or toys or whatever it is, then they allow them to do it. No problem, nothing, no harm in that. But did you teach them the value of that money? No. So how do you teach them value of money as opposed to just letting them believe that if it's your money, you can spend it the way you want? And that's why it's not about turning it into a burden again. It's about having that conversation with them, making them aware of what is it that you can do or achieve with this. But to be able to do that, this is where it gets interesting. To be able to have that conversation with your children, you need to actually understand what is important to them, not what you believe should be important to them. So if you don't know what your child's true interests are because you're so focused on making sure that they are interested in the activities, the sporting activities or whatever it is that you've been taking them for, then when they want to spend their money on something that is completely irrelevant to any of that, you're going to think they're wasting it. So what hobbies do they have? What passions do they have? Are they interested in reading? Are they interested in creative arts or in modeling things with their hands? Are they interested in a specific hobby or a specific area of interest? And they might want to spend that money on that. But you wouldn't be able to guide them towards spending it on that because you're going to focus on it's your money and you deserve it, so go and spoil yourself.
Right, yeah. And then we often prioritize that on, some of us parents dictating and saying, well, this is the ED. Don't you think you should be getting this or buying that? And it often becomes about consumerism, about buying something, something physical, and often the whole element or the principle of, as they get older and they understand, is the concept of sadaqah, from what you receive.
Yes.
And then how could we gift our children differently? Also, I think would be part of that financial literacy. Are we gifting money always as cash or notes as money? And who knows, maybe in a few years' time, kids will be gifted cryptocurrency. Who knows for Eid? But for now, what about things like gifting them experiences? Because often our kids then feel so entitled to that holiday because everyone's going on holiday, all my friends, so I expect that. But instead, if we were to gift experiences, and it need not be something lavish or extravagant, but just gifting experiences, as small as they are, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And also it comes back to that whole self-worth issue, right? If you pay attention to what it is that your children are inclined to buy when they've got money, that will give you an indication of whether they're looking for social validation or are they looking for personal fulfillment. And if you don't pay attention to that, you might think, all the children have it and everyone's doing it these days, so it's okay, And yeah, fine, it might be okay on some instances, but if it's, again, not in balance, if there isn't a healthy balance between them wanting to get something that is currently trending versus them putting away or at least investing in something that is going to give them a longer term gain. And in child's terms, we're talking long term is like a few months, we're not talking years. They must start developing an appreciation for why it is that instant gratification is actually not the best thing for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that seems to be getting more and more challenging each year, as it goes by, technology being developed.
And everything's a click away.
Yeah. And if that's such a challenge for adults, then we can only imagine how difficult that is for little people.
Yes, and as adults, how often do we spoil ourselves by buying ourselves that little thing that we think we deserve because we work so hard? What are we teaching our children? Yeah, it's okay to spoil yourself like that, but there has to be more than that. And that's where the experiences and participation, active involvement in each other's lives and all of that comes in. Otherwise, you're literally like saying, well, this world is just here for you to work hard and take care of your family and spoil yourself once or twice in between, and then you die. It's
What a sad existence. What a sad existence that
it
would be.
is, right? How
Yeah,
many
I
of
think
us?
it's maybe what we say from that. Yeah, it's such a sad, purposeless, joyless existence. I can't see anyone wanting that. So, we see you talked about trends and what's the latest gadgets and toys and all of that when it comes to financial literacy and teaching them modeling how to save and spend and share. When we see these trends come and, with many of our tweens and teens, for the first time in their life, there's this hype around certain items. There was a power drink at some point earlier this year, small little things sometimes, and they could be much bigger, more expensive things. So we've got that consumerism angle as well, and that plays to the tune of the teenage self. So their stuff, their quarter, the targets literally of that. What tips would you be able to share with us when it comes to allowing our children to decide, okay, I want this, I need this, or actually neither, but I just want to fit in with my friends. I'm sure this has to do with our self-worth.
It's completely to do with self-worth, and
Okay, tell us more.
So the interesting part is that the parents can't be 100% accountable for the self-worth of the children, and I say this with sensitivity because I know it's easy to blame the parents for how the children turn out, but up until a point only, because when the children achieve a sense of self, a sense of self-awareness and understanding, and they can start choosing what they want to adopt for themselves and what they don't, that's where the relationship we built with them before that point becomes critically important. So when they start wanting to choose things and do things and get things that is not necessarily going to be healthy for them, that's where if the parents' self-worth is not in a good space, they're going to find it difficult to say no because they want to be popular. They want to be liked more than they want to be a parent and make the unpopular choice or decision. And if they're still busy modeling themselves about how it is that they couldn't get this with their parents, so they're not going to allow their children to not feel like they're part of the in crowd and all of that, then you're not doing your job as a parent. You're trying to be a friend, and your child has enough friends that they would come across in life. They need a parent. And if you're not willing to be that parent, then you are disabling your child in the process of becoming an adult, because where do they then learn why it is that the unpopular decision sometimes has to be made regardless of what people think of you?
I appreciate that term you use, disabling, because I think that just hits the note exactly. That's exactly what we're doing. Disabling.
And that then plays out, unfortunately, in a very, very emotionally expensive way in their relationships, in their homes. And that's why we see marriages don't last beyond 6 months these days, because they don't know how to deal with that kind of disruption. They don't know how to deal with being wrong, or with being or not getting something their way, or with their partners not responding in the way they need them to respond. They don't have that emotional resilience because we've been protecting them from not getting things their way.
So a parent is hearing this term for the first time, emotional resilience. Can you break that term down for us a little bit, please?
Emotional resilience, I believe, is directly related to self-worth, and self-worth is directly related to experiencing gratitude. But we often misunderstand gratitude to be what we appreciate in life. So children will say that they appreciate that their parents give them a decent life. They've got their own room, they've got a comfortable space to live, they've got food to eat and all that. Okay, that's pretty much step one. And if you're not at that step yet, then you've got even bigger problems. But that's not gratitude. Gratitude is not what we appreciate. Gratitude is what we do with what we claim to appreciate. And if we don't teach our children the value of that, then there can be no self-worth, because self-worth is based on the value you place on yourself for who you are, not for what you have. And if you don't have self-worth, you then won't be emotionally resilient, because needing to be perceived or received in a certain way becomes all important. because you're defined by how others respond to you. And that's what you determine to be your worth to them. And in turn, if you don't have self-worth, your sense of self is defined by how others accept or reject you. And that's how you end up given into peer pressure. That's how you end up chasing the Joneses. That's how you end up trying to follow trends, and where you kind of like are very pliable. You're easy to shape into what society expects from you. And if society is heading in the wrong direction, you head in the wrong direction with society, because you don't know what you stand for or what you're worth. So self-worth is critical. But more often than not, we have adults raising children where the adults themselves don't have a healthy sense of self-worth. And that's why it becomes very difficult to raise children with a healthier self-worth. You can raise children with knowing what's right and wrong, but it doesn't mean that how they feel about themselves is going to be healthy. And that's why we become harsh and intolerant, because who we are doesn't matter. What we do is the only thing that everyone judges.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's why emotional resilience becomes difficult. So emotional resilience is where you can take the unpopular position on something because it resonates with your value system, and your value system, because you've experienced the value of it, you know that it's something that you're not willing to compromise, because without it, you know that you're going to be someone you don't want to be. That's emotional resilience.
What would be, thank you for that, what would be your number one tip for parents who are ready to embark on emotional resilience for themselves and their children? Where do they start?
I think it starts with first allowing yourself to be human. Not allowing yourself to be a good or a bad parent, about allowing yourself to be human, about understanding why it is that a good person can get things wrong, and then doing something about why you got it wrong, rather than judging yourself for getting it wrong. You have to allow yourself to be human. If you're not going to allow yourself to be human, you will not be able to empathize with anyone else, because you're going to focus on who's right, who's wrong, and who's showing up the way you admire, and who's behaving in a way that you are repulsed by. And when it comes to your children, the same thing applies then, because you won't see. And this is something that is extremely important, because I find a lot of parents struggle with this, and I almost can see the figurative light bulbs going up above their heads when they hear this, is that if you're having difficulty connecting with your children, and you're trying everything you can to persuade them and encourage them and convince them and discipline them and everything else, chances are you stopped seeing the little human behind that role of child. And the one thing that parents stop doing very early on with their children, I think, is that they stop looking in their eyes.
Wow.
They start seeing their discipline, they see their behavior, they see their character, they see their compliance, they see their conduct, but they don't look in the eyes to see, is there joy or is there fear there? And when you start connecting with your child again from that perspective, and you see the innocence behind the bad behavior, you see the anxiety or the restlessness, or you see the fear of not being enough, then when you respond to the bad behavior, it's definitely going to have some empathy and understanding and compassion, rather than just this brute force retaliation against bad behavior.
I love what you said about looking into our children's eyes, and it is such a prophetic example, and yet we who have that legacy of being from this ummah don't apply it, because we know that the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he spoke to someone, he would turn himself to face toward them. And so we know that he would be engaging his entire body language with the person that he was speaking to.
Yeah.
And yet often, it's not that it's once off, but it's so often. And when we're talking to our loved ones, we're talking to them with our heads bent down on our devices.
Yes.
Right? Or we're there physically, but and sometimes we're connecting with the physical eye, but not with the eye of the heart. So
Yes.
we're doing the duty, we're saying, well, okay, let's check this off the list, let's tick it off. Okay, spend time with child 1, child 2, sat with them, figured out what's happening, but there just isn't that connection because our heads and hearts are elsewhere.
Yeah. And that's how we lose our own humanness.
Like you said, we're so busy when we talked about balance earlier, let alone for our own kids and helping them and supporting them in having that work-life play balance, that we ourselves keep ourselves so busy. We busy ourselves day and night up until we're sick that we don't have time to reflect. We don't have time to sit with our thoughts or be by ourselves.
Yes. Or to even just savor a moment with them.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not sure where you are in your season of life, but I'm hearing from a lot of women who are now in this, what they call this, almost like an empty nest, where their children are studying elsewhere or getting married or moving out of the house, and now realizing that it's such a big thing for people. And you sit and talk with them, it's not so much about the children not being in the house or studying or working or boarding school. It is, I'm going to be by myself. That's what people say.
Yes.
It's really about just being, can I be by myself? What is it to be by myself or with myself? Can I enjoy my own company? The idea of just sitting by yourself, being with yourself, going out for a cup of coffee with yourself, just being at home with yourself or in your workspace on your own. I think many people, are they afraid of that, to be by themselves, with themselves?
I don't think they're afraid of it. I think that they didn't realize that they didn't know who they are in the absence of their duties.
Right.
And that's the saddest thing of all, is to see people who have been through often a really tough life. And there's two reasons why this is really sad, right? The one is that at some point, your children are going to move on to make their own lives. And then you're going to have something of substance in your own space so that you're not constantly needy of them giving you attention and making you feel as if you're appreciated.
Exactly.
The other thing about that is that your children have never known you in the absence of duty. They don't know who you are as a human. They don't know who that bubbling teenager was or who that dreamy kind of young adult was. Because the only thing they've ever been exposed to about you is this responsible, painfully kind of intense person who's always making sure that everyone does what they need to do. How are they supposed to adopt our character or what it is that we want to see them light up with if they've never experienced that in us? If the biggest achievement we felt was like, oh, we got them to school on time every day this week and there was no problems and they're doing their homework and they're getting good grades. When did life become about that? I think we've lost ourselves horribly as humans.
Yeah.
And that's why we can't raise humans. We can only raise functioning adults that are responsible and nothing more.
Yeah. That is what's happening. Yeah. It's interesting. I was speaking to a marriage counselor recently who has many years of experience, and we were preparing for a radio interview. And she mentioned that she noticed amongst those who are mother-in-laws, father-in-laws, those that had this work-play life balance for themselves, those that had an identity outside of just being the family mother or father, meaning who they are as in their own identity, their own interests, their own hobbies, passions, and were able to develop that after the children grew older, and not as you mentioned, just hanging on for the children's attention, not being able to let go of as a parent let go of that apron string, that their children had marriages that thrived much better, not always, but very often, she said, and that they were much more cordial, pleasant, in-laws to be around. And that's what their daughter-in-laws and son-in-laws said, that they enjoyed their company because they were not hanging on for that attention. They had a life of their own, an identity that they could honor their, right? So it's so far-reaching, the consequences. It's not just about the child that's in the home and about you being a happy, healthy, well-rounded individual who models that to your children, but that for them to see that, yes, it's important, but that the way your future grandchildren will be and their level of happiness can actually be so much so based on how you, as that, in the future grandmother, grandfather, are looking after yourself, are taking care of your interests, your balance in life, nurturing your own self.
Definitely. It reminds me of something that I used to remind people of when I was in the corporate space. Because I often used to get new managers and people that I kind of like coached or mentored into a management role or leadership role of some sort. And one of the questions they often asked is like, how do I get my team to listen to me, for example? And my response to them would always be that you need to demonstrate the passion you have for what you do so that they can be inspired by that passion. Now, if we take that and we apply it to life, apply it to our role as parents, if we don't demonstrate our passion for life, how are our children going to develop that passion?
Yes.
We are, whether we like it or not, and whether they like it or not, and this is ultimately the truth that we just cannot escape. No matter what your relationship with your parents are, it will be the most defining relationship of your life. Whether your parent was present or absent, whether they were abusive or they were kind, that will be the most defining relationship of your life. Whether you grew up as an orphan or you didn't, that absence of that relationship becomes the most defining relationship of your life. And unless we start recognizing this, we won't realize what we're taking from that relationship. And as parents, if we don't realize this yet, we won't realize what we took from our relationship with our parents that is now shaping how we're showing up for our children. We have to be more mindful about this.
We do. Definitely. Our time with you is almost coming to a close, and we don't want to hold you up any longer. We're very grateful for all the time you've shared with us. Jazakumullah khair. What would you, in your line of work as a parent yourself, community member, what would you say are the biggest challenges we are currently facing in preparing our sons and daughters for adulthood and beyond? And secondly, how would you advise and start resolving these challenges?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think one of the biggest challenges, more than anything else, especially with kind of all of the themes playing out in the social justice space right now, one of the biggest challenges that I've been grappling with as a parent of late is recognizing what is the limitation of your ability to shape the thinking or the understanding of your children relative to what they're exposed to by the broader village. And the reason why this is important is because you're going to get to a point where they're going to want to discover for themselves rather than take your advice. And when you try more than you should to protect them from that consequence, not only do you risk losing yourself to it and becoming someone you don't want to be, and that's an important grounding point, I think, as adults, we need to have that. We need to have that grounding point of who do you want to be versus who do you have to be. And when it comes to children, they need to discover that as well. And sometimes you can't protect them from the consequences of the choices that they make. But you have to just be willing to be there when they realize that they should have listened, or they should have taken your advice, or they should have engaged with you differently so they could have figured it out in a better way without having to do it the expensive way. So as a parent, I think the biggest challenge we have is, for starters, knowing who we want to be versus who we have to be, and recognizing that part of preparing our children for adulthood is to give them an opportunity to accept the consequences of the choices that they make, choices that we may disagree with. But if we impose our wishes on them by introducing all sorts of constraints that prevent them from doing something that is wrong, that's where you see children, the moment they don't have that fear of consequence, or the parents don't have that hold over them anymore because they have their independence. They now married, or they've got their own job and they've got their own income. That's where you see them starting to explore things in an unhealthy way because they just didn't have any reason to understand why it was important for them not to do it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. If we were to project ourselves into the future, where would you hope, inshallah, that we are with regards to this, preparing our youth, our young adults for adulthood? Where would you hope we are 10 years from now? Where should we be?
I think
move in which direction?
As crazy as this might sound, given that I'm always raising alarm bells about where we're heading, I actually think that we're going through a phase of massive recalibration as a community, as a society. And we're seeing the current generation grappling the most with that recalibration. But I also trust that, inshallah, they are heading in a direction that will convince them in their own ways that all this, the attraction, the false attraction of the kind of lifestyle that they're exposed to online, in social media and that, they're starting to realize very quickly, and I'm seeing this in my own lifetime, alhamdulillah, that it went from this hype that this is the way life works to starting to realize that life is empty that way, to starting to look for substance behind life. And we're starting to see a lot more of those conversations happening with the youth now than before. That beyond the frivolity of stupid pranks and trends and things on social media and TikTok and things like that, they're actually starting to look for meaning, for purpose. And the adults have lost themselves to being dutiful for so long that they're not in a position to offer that kind of wisdom and insight to the children. And they're starting to look for it in different ways. So I see that, inshallah, in 10 years' time, the kind of trends that we're having to grapple with now, identity, politics, and these pronouns and things like that, the absolute madness around all of that, that is going to pass as a phase that people are going to look back on and think, what were we thinking? It's not going to be something that's going to shape the future of generations to come. Because right now, even within those same generations, there are very, very strong, powerful voices starting to emerge that this just doesn't make sense. And we need to solve the right problem, not these ridiculous new problems that we're creating.
Indeed. Lots of hope, inshallah. And it's been such a pleasure. Jazakumullah khair for your time today, for joining us on the program, on this platform, and for sharing with us so generously, giving us that hope, and also helping us to become more mindful in whichever capacity we are, whether we are nurturing or being the ones that are nurtured, the importance of being mindful of our space in community and society, the consequences, repercussions, and the impact of that's felt decades and years after us.
Yes.
Definitely.
I mean.
Yeah. Are there any last words you'd like to share with our listeners before we conclude for today?
The only thought that comes to mind is that no matter how dreary things look, no matter how overbearing or overwhelming the external influences from society appear to be, there's always hope. Hopelessness is not an attribute of a believer. And rather than focusing on all the threats, we need to focus on what it is that we can do to create opportunity. Not to counter the threats, to create opportunity. Because when we create opportunity for good, the threats become irrelevant. And inshallah, once we start focusing on that, once we start focusing on being purposeful rather than ritualistic or just rigid in needing to maintain a certain way of life, when we become purposeful about that way of life, we'll actually connect with gratitude, with why that way of life is important, and that's what our children will take from us, inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, Coach Said, for being with us today on Radio Islam and taking us through this topic that often is not spoken about. We often have plenty of topics and platforms on which to discuss parenting and motherhood and fatherhood, but not enough about preparing our children for adulthood and beyond. And for that, we want to thank you for your time, your expertise that you've shared with us on Radio Islam today. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much.
Barakallah. Jazakallah for having me. It's always my honor to participate in your show.
Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.